Beneath the cobblestones of a great medieval capital, a secret war decided the fate of empires. The most critical battles were not fought with swords, but with ink and stealth, in a hidden labyrinth of archives. This is the story of the secret duels between Inkmakers and Scroll Thieves. By the end, you will understand how this clandestine conflict shaped the very information that built our modern world. How did an alchemist's ink defeat a master thief without a single blow being struck? What happened when a stolen scroll began to weep like a human heart? The answers lie in the shadows. What does it truly mean to control a story? These archives were a living paradox, a monument to order built upon a foundation of pure chaos. They were not designed by a single architect, but grew over centuries like a coral reef of parchment and stone. Each new king or high chancellor would add their own wing, their own vault, their own layer of secret passages, creating a three-dimensional puzzle that no single map could ever contain. Corridors would dead-end without warning. Staircases led to blank walls. A seemingly solid bookcase might pivot to reveal a chamber containing a single, world-altering scroll. This intentional disorientation was the first and most powerful line of defense. To enter was to be immediately lost, a feeling that preyed upon the mind as much as any physical trap. The air itself was a carefully controlled element, thick with the scent of aged paper, drying ink, and the faint metallic tang of the alchemical preservatives used to stop time itself. This was a place where knowledge was not just stored, it was imprisoned, and any prison, no matter how secure, will always attract those who wish to stage a breakout. The protectors of this realm were the archivists and inkmakers, a guild of scholars who saw themselves as the shepherds of truth. The plunderers were the scroll thieves, agents of rival courts and ambitious nobles who understood that to control a kingdom's past was to dictate its future. In the profound silence between the towering shelves, these two forces would meet, their conflict as inevitable as the turning of a page. Their power began with a single drop of liquid. The Inkmakers Guild were the unseen architects of reality, transforming fragile parchment into unassailable truth. A member of this guild was not a man with a name, but a silhouette with a recipe. He might be called Brother Iron Gall or Sister Viridian, his identity erased and replaced by the substance he mastered. Their workshops were not filled with the clatter of hammers, but with the gentle slosh of potions brewing in glass vessels, each one a closely held secret passed down through generations. One recipe might call for powdered lapis lazuli, imported at great cost from distant mountains, to create a blue that sang of royal authority. Another required the soot from a specific type of candlewood, mixed with a binding agent derived from fish glue, to produce a black so deep it seemed to swallow the light. But their true masterpieces were the security inks. These were alchemical marvels far beyond simple pigment. An archivist could pen an entire treaty with an ink that appeared as plain black script. Yet when the parchment was held in the light of a full moon, a second, hidden message would shimmer into view, written in a ghostly silver script only the king and his most trusted advisor were meant to see. Another ink might be laced with a subtle irritant, a dust from a rare flower that caused a mild but unmistakable tingling in the fingertips of anyone who traced the letters without first applying a neutralizing salve. This was how they caught a thief, not with a blade but with a sneeze. Their oath was not to a person but to the crown's official story. They were the gatekeepers of what became fact, and their ink was the lock. To possess a bottle of royal ink without guild sanction was a crime punishable by imprisonment, for you held the potential to rewrite history itself. This absolute control over the written word made them indispensable, and it also made them terrifying, for every lock, however complex, inspires the creation of a more cunning key. Against this fortress of official truth moved the shadows in the stacks. The Scroll Thieves were not a single organized guild, but a loose and shifting network of individuals, each drawn to the archives for their own reasons. Some were disgraced scholars, men who had once walked the halls in plain sight but now returned as ghosts, seeking to correct a record that had wronged them. Others were agents of foreign powers, sent to steal the architectural plans for a new siege engine or the secret clauses of a proposed treaty. A few were simply mercenaries of knowledge, selling their skills to the highest bidder, whether that was a jealous noble or a rival city-state. What united them was a profound understanding that to control a single scroll was to control a piece of reality itself, to snip a thread from the grand tapestry and weave in a new one of their own design. Their methods were a testament to human ingenuity in the face of overwhelming security. They could not simply smash and grab. A successful thief was a master of subtlety. He might employ lock-picking tools carved from the rib bone of a deer, a material that would not ring against the iron of a lock like metal would. He used trained rodents, their tiny bodies slipping through ventilation shafts no human could navigate, dragging behind them a silk thread that could then be used to pull a stronger cord and finally a thin rope. Some of the most brilliant thieves never even touched the scrolls they sought. They developed incredible memory techniques, spending hours in a darkened corner of the archives committing an entire land grant or royal decree to memory, then escaping to write it all down from recall, leaving the original document physically untouched but its power irrevocably stolen. One thief might be motivated by a desperate ideology, believing that exposing a state secret would prevent a war. Another might be driven by pure greed, knowing a single scroll of forgotten trade routes could buy him a lordship. And some were simply obsessed, playing a high-stakes game of wits for the sheer thrill of outsmarting the most vigilant guardians in the kingdom. This clash was never a simple matter of good versus evil. It was a duel over the very nature of truth, fought in the profound silence between the towering shelves. The great Scriptorium Schism shattered the fragile peace. It began not with a shout, but with a whisper among the junior scribes, men and women who spent their days copying the crown's official history only to see its lies up close. They had transcribed the scrolls detailing a catastrophic military defeat, a failure of command that cost thousands of lives. The official record, however, praised the campaign as a tactical triumph. This cognitive break, this daily confrontation with manufactured truth, bred a dangerous disillusionment. A small faction decided the kingdom deserved to know, and they plotted to leak the unedited scrolls to a sympathetic noble. Their method was simple. They would use their access to smuggle the documents out over several nights. What they did not account for was the very substance they wrote with. The Inkmakers Guild, bound by their unbreakable oath to the crown, had already taken precautions against such internal threats. They provided the junior scribes with a special batch of ink, one laced with a rare, odorless tracking agent derived from a desert lichen. The ink itself was a perfect black, flawless in its appearance, but on the hands of anyone who handled the finished parchment without the neutralizing salve, it left an invisible mark. Under the specific light of a lantern treated with a complementary alchemical solution, the thieves' fingertips would glow with a faint, telltale green. The conspirators were caught not in the act of stealing, but simply by having their hands inspected as they left the scriptorium. The aftermath was swift and silent. The scribes vanished from their posts, and the official story of their dismissal was one of routine reassignment. But within the close-knit community of the archives, the truth was understood. This was not merely the punishment of a few rogue clerks, it was a declaration. The Inkmakers had chosen their side unequivocally, proving that their loyalty was to the institution of power, not to any abstract ideal of truth. The schism tore through the underground world. For the Scroll Thieves, the Guild was no longer a neutral guardian of knowledge but an active arm of the Crown's repression. For the Inkmakers, every outsider was now a potential insurgent, a threat to the sacred order they preserved. The archives were irrevocably transformed. The quiet shelves now felt like a front line, every new scroll a piece of contested territory, and every bottle of ink a potential weapon in a silent, escalating war for the right to define reality itself. Master Inkmaker Alaric's first great duel did not involve a chase through dark corridors, but a quiet act of sabotage in his own workshop. The thief known as the Magpie had already succeeded, slipping past the archive's physical guards to steal a scroll that detailed the legitimate but politically inconvenient bloodline of a rival duke. Possession of that parchment would have given the duke a powerful claim to the throne, upending the kingdom's balance of power. Alaric, however, had prepared for this exact scenario. He had personally crafted the ink used to pen that lineage, a special brew that looked perfectly black and permanent, yet its true nature was one of temporary existence. It was designed to fade completely to the color of blank parchment after exactly 3 days, unless it was treated with a chemical counter-agent, a formula Alaric kept locked away in his mind. This was not a defense meant to stop a theft, but to render the theft itself meaningless. The duel that followed was a battle of nerves. Alaric tracked the Magpie to a rented room above a tavern, but he did not storm the door. He simply waited, a silent sentinel in the street below, counting down the hours. Inside, the Magpie would have been studying his prize, perhaps preparing to make his copy, unaware that the proof he held was evaporating before his eyes. On the morning of the 4th day, the thief emerged, not with a triumphant stride, but with the slow, defeated gait of a man carrying a profound emptiness. He discarded the now blank scroll in a rain barrel, his entire scheme undone not by a blade, but by the slow, inexorable retreat of ink from parchment. This first recorded clash established a terrifying new principle in the secret war. The Inkmakers had demonstrated they could make knowledge itself ephemeral. They could grant a secret a lifespan and then revoke it, leaving a thief with nothing but the ghost of an opportunity and the chilling realization that the very truth he sought to possess could be made to disappear on command. Alaric's fading ink was just the beginning of a much deeper arsenal. The Inkmakers Guild developed defenses that were as much about psychology as they were about chemistry. Consider the sentry ink, a seemingly ordinary wax used to seal important documents. If a thief broke that seal, exposing the inner layer to air, it would release a pungent, sulfurous odor completely harmless but impossible to ignore. The stench would cling to the thief's hands and clothes for days, marking him as clearly as a brand to any guard or hound that crossed his path. It turned the act of opening a scroll into a public announcement of the crime. Then there were the mirror scripts. An agent might successfully steal a diplomatic letter, only to find the text inside was a garbled, backwards mess. It could only be read correctly when reflected in a specific, highly polished type of silver, a material no thief would typically carry on a clandestine mission. The scroll became a useless prize, its secrets locked behind a mirrored wall only the intended recipient could open. But perhaps their most cunning inventions were the cursing inks. These special brews were rumored to be infused with minor hexes, blessed or perhaps cursed by reclusive mystics who worked in tandem with the guild. A thief who read a document written in such an ink might not be struck down by lightning, but he would be plagued by a run of inexplicable bad luck. His tools would break at critical moments, his allies would suddenly grow suspicious, his carefully laid plans would unravel over a series of small, frustrating misfortunes. Whether these inks held genuine power or simply preyed upon the suggestible mind was irrelevant. The belief in the curse was itself a powerful deterrent, a spectral guardian that followed a thief home from the archives and into his daily life. This was the true genius of the Inkmakers. They defended knowledge not just with locks and potions, but by weaponizing a thief's own fear and superstition, making the very idea of stealing a scroll feel like a dangerous pact with unseen forces. While the Inkmakers weaponized chemistry and superstition, the Scroll Thieves perfected the art of the unseen hand. Their survival depended on a toolkit of subterfuge and misdirection, turning everyday objects into instruments of deception. A hollowed-out book, its interior carved away to create a secret compartment, could be carried openly through the archives, its false weight and scholarly title deflecting all suspicion. A satchel with a false bottom became a portable vault, allowing a thief to pass a dozen checkpoints with a priceless scroll resting just inches below a guard's searching fingers. These simple tricks were the first layer of a much deeper craft. The most skilled thieves became masters of the palimpsest, a delicate and destructive art. They would acquire legal but unimportant documents, often old tax records or outdated decrees, and with painstaking care, use pumice stone and lemon juice to gently scrape away the original ink. The goal was to thin the precious vellum just enough to erase the past without tearing a hole in the material. Onto this newly blank surface, they would then forge the text of the scroll they wished to replace, creating a perfect visual duplicate. The theft could go unnoticed for months, the original document replaced by a forgery that felt and looked identical, until one day a historian or clerk would notice the parchment was unusually thin, or that the ink lacked the specific sheen of the royal guild. By then, the thief and the true scroll were long gone. For those who could not risk the physical swap, there was the discipline of perfect recall. A thief would spend days, sometimes weeks, in a secluded corner of the archives, memorizing a document line by line, number by number. He was not reading for understanding, but absorbing the text as a pure pattern, a shape to be reconstructed later. Then, in the safety of a hidden workshop, he would reproduce the entire scroll from memory, his hand guided by a mental photograph. The original remained on its shelf, utterly untouched, and the archive's meticulous inventory would show nothing amiss. The kingdom would operate for weeks on the assumption that its secrets were safe, while a perfect copy was already on its way to a rival court. Yet their most powerful tool was not an object or a skill, but a person. A low-level archivist, underpaid and overlooked, could be bribed or blackmailed into revealing the shifting guard schedules, the location of a newly installed sentry ink seal, or the floor plan for a wing that did not officially exist. This insider information turned the archive's greatest strength, its human knowledge, into its most critical vulnerability. The Silent War was not just a clash of inventions, but a battle for the loyalty of the very people who walked the halls every day. The next escalation in the Silent War turned the very air into a weapon. Inkmaker Ilara was handed a scroll of immense value, a single sheet of vellum that mapped the kingdom's most secret trade routes, the lifeblood of its economy. Her task was not merely to lock it away, but to make it impossible to use if stolen. Her solution was a masterpiece of acoustic alchemy. She treated the parchment with a rare, translucent resin, painstakingly brushed onto the fibers. To the eye, the scroll appeared perfectly normal, but when flexed or unrolled at the speed a person would use to read it, the resin-coated fibers would vibrate against each other, emitting a continuous, high-pitched whistle. It was a sound just at the edge of human hearing, a persistent, ethereal chirp that most would dismiss as a trick of the wind or a ringing in their own ears. It was an alarm that required no bell tower, one that traveled with the stolen property itself. The thief who took the bait was Corvus, a man known for his ability to move through the capital's high places with the silence of a shadow. He bypassed every physical guard, every locked gate, and slipped the scroll from its case with fingers as delicate as a watchmaker's. His victory, however, was short-lived. The moment he tried to unroll his prize in the seclusion of a bell tower, the parchment sang its silent song. He could feel the faint vibration in his hands, a subtle hum that betrayed him. He could not read it, could not copy it, could not even verify its contents without announcing his location to the world. The duel that followed was a chase defined by its soundtrack. Ilara, armed with a long listening cone of lacquered wood and silver, took to the rooftops. She was not a warrior, but a hunter tracking a spectral scent. She would stand perfectly still against a chimney, her cone aimed at the night, listening. Corvus, for his part, was trapped. Every shift of his pack, every cautious attempt to peek at the scroll, risked producing that telltale chirp. An accidental flex as he leaped between two roofs would give Ilara a bearing. A near-inaudible whistle as he adjusted his grip would narrow her search to a single city block. He was a ghost haunted by the voice of his own prize, a prisoner to the very object he had worked so hard to obtain. This was the duel of the singing parchment, a conflict where the greatest threat was not a shout, but a whisper, proving that in the archive's silent war, sometimes the most powerful weapon was a sound nobody was supposed to hear. Yet the Inkmakers and Thieves were not the only players in this silent war. Between the towering shelves moved a third force, the Archive Guardians, a class of enforcers whose loyalty was to the space itself, not the knowledge it contained. These were often men who had seen battle on open fields, retired soldiers whose new vow was one of absolute silence, or monks who had traded one form of devotion for another. They were not scholars, they did not read the scrolls they protected. Their duty was to the rule of law within the archives, a set of inviolable codes that governed the very air one breathed. They patrolled the labyrinthine corridors with a slow, deliberate pace, their eyes missing nothing. They were the sole enforcers of the strict no-light after sundown rule, a decree meant to eliminate all shadows where a thief might hide. And they were the only souls permitted to carry blades within those hallowed halls, a stark reminder that for all the alchemical trickery and memory games, the ultimate authority here was still cold, sharp steel. Their presence fundamentally altered the dynamics of every duel. A master thief, poised to swap a scroll with a perfect forgery, would have to freeze mid-motion, holding his breath as the soft footfalls of a guardian passed just feet away. An inkmaker, rushing to inspect a seal for signs of tampering, had to school his expression into one of calm routine under their impartial gaze. These sentinels were a wild card, an unpredictable element of pure order imposed upon a conflict of subterfuge. A brilliant, days-long plan could be undone in an instant by a guardian rounding an unexpected corner, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. For both the guild and the thieves, success meant not only outsmarting each other, but also navigating a maze of ever-watchful, silent judges who could end their intricate dance with a single, unanswerable command. This silent war, for all its shadows, was fueled by a river of gold. The Inkmakers Guild operated as a state-sanctioned monopoly, their immense costs covered by direct grants from the royal treasury. Every drop of their security ink, every batch of whispering parchment, was paid for by the crown, making them a permanent and powerful arm of the government. Their financial stability allowed for years of research into a single defensive ink, turning their workshops into fortresses of alchemical innovation. In return, the crown received absolute control over the official narrative, a return on investment they considered priceless. The Scroll Thieves, however, navigated a far more volatile and diverse economy. A foreign king seeking to embarrass a rival or uncover a military weakness would fund an entire network of agents, providing them with the best tools, safe houses, and bribes for insiders. A wealthy merchant consortium, desperate for the secret maps to a new spice route, would bankroll a single high-stakes theft, offering a fortune for a single scroll that could break a competitor. But money was not the only currency. A rare and dangerous breed known as the ideological thief operated outside this mercenary system. These individuals were funded by secret societies or dissident religious groups who believed a hidden truth could topple a corrupt regime or spark a spiritual reformation. For them, the scroll was not a commodity to be sold, but a key to a different future. This financial underpinning dictated the very nature of the conflict. A lone ideological thief, motivated by fervent belief, might spend months planning the theft of a single pivotal deed. In contrast, a cell of royally funded professionals could attempt something far more ambitious, like the coordinated extraction of an entire library section detailing the kingdom's naval defenses. Their goal was not just to possess a secret, but to systematically dismantle a nation's strategic advantage. The quiet scratching of pens and the soft footfalls in the archives were merely the surface expressions of a deep and constant economic exchange, proving that from its very beginning, information has always carried a price, and the battle to control it has always been a question of who is willing to pay. The third great duel unfolded not in dark corridors, but within the intricate pathways of language itself. A master thief known only as the scribe had achieved the seemingly impossible. He had not stolen a treaty or a map, but the key to all of them, a single, heavily guarded lexicon that held the cipher for the kingdom's entire diplomatic code. Possessing it was like holding a skeleton key to every secret message exchanged between the crown and its allies. The Inkmaker, a quiet scholar named Gideon, faced a problem with no simple chemical solution. He could not make the lexicon fade or sing an alarm, for the document was irreplaceable, a vital tool for the kingdom's own diplomats. Destroying its value would be as damaging as losing it. So Gideon crafted a defense of pure intellect. He took the stolen lexicon and with painstaking care re-encoded it. He did not change the words but the cipher key itself, rebuilding it around the grammar and syntax of a dying regional dialect, one spoken by a handful of reclusive mountain villagers. To anyone else, the lexicon appeared intact, but to the scribe it was now a lock for which he no longer possessed the key. The physical object was in his hands, yet its meaning had been placed behind a second, even more impenetrable door. The duel instantly transformed. It was no longer a hunt through the archives, but a frantic race through the scholarly districts of the capital. The scribe, a man who prided himself on his linguistic prowess, now found himself desperately seeking a translator fluent in this obscure tongue, a person both rare and risky to approach. He moved from one dusty scriptorium to another, whispering his request in back rooms, knowing that any misstep could lead to his capture. Meanwhile, Gideon worked with equal urgency from the opposite direction. He dispatched trusted couriers to every academic contact, every known expert in regional dialects, warning them to report anyone asking about that specific language. The conflict became a test of networks, a battle to see who could mobilize the right intellectual resources first. Would the scribe find his linguistic key and unlock the kingdom's secrets, or would Gideon's web of scholars tighten around him, turning his greatest prize into a trap that closed with a whisper, not a shout? This was a duel where the sharpest weapon was a verb tense, and the deadliest trap was a forgotten grammatical rule. This silent war was never a simple battle between light and shadow. To cast the Inkmakers as heroes and the thieves as villains is to misunderstand the very nature of their conflict. Many of those who slipped through the archives saw themselves not as criminals, but as liberators of a truth imprisoned by the state. Their targets were often specific, chosen not for their market value, but for their power to correct a historical wrong. One thief might dedicate his life to stealing a single land grant that proved a noble family had stolen its estate from commoners decades before. Another might risk everything to extract a physician's scroll, a text detailing a life-saving medical procedure that the Royal College had suppressed to maintain its monopoly on knowledge. From our modern vantage point, some of their actions look less like theft and more like a form of medieval whistleblowing, an act of conscience against an unaccountable power. This moral ambiguity seeped into the very stones of the archives, complicating every duel. An inkmaker, bound by his sacred oath, could spend his days perfecting a security ink meant to protect a scroll containing a brazen lie about a battlefield surrender. His entire professional pride was invested in defending a fiction. Meanwhile, the thief trying to steal that very scroll might be motivated by a desperate need to clear his grandfather's name, to restore a truth that would bring peace to his family. Who, then, was on the side of justice? The conflict forced individuals on both sides into moments of profound crisis. An archivist, upon accidentally discovering the very corruption a thief had tried to expose, might find his faith in the institution he served beginning to crack. A thief, in turn, could be hired to steal a genuinely dangerous secret, like the location of a hidden dissident community, forcing him to weigh his financial gain against the potential for real harm. This gray area is what elevates their story beyond a simple tale of cops and robbers. It reveals the secret war as a deeply human struggle over conscience, loyalty, and the heavy cost of truth. Every choice to protect a scroll or to steal one was laden with personal consequence, a quiet drama of conflicting duties playing out in the flickering lantern light, where the right thing to do was never as clear as the ink on the page. Lysandra's living ink blurred the final line between alchemy and a new, terrifying form of science. Her breakthrough was not born from a flask, but from a deep understanding of the natural world. High in the damp, forgotten caves of the northern mountains, she discovered a species of luminescent fungi that released a microscopic phosphorescent pollen. By grinding the fungi into a fine powder and suspending it in a clear binding agent, she created a symbiotic ink. When used to write, the script would pulse with a soft, ethereal light, beautiful and legible. But its true purpose was invisible. The living spores within the ink would continue to breathe, releasing their glittering pollen onto anyone who handled the parchment. The pollen was utterly harmless, a fine, golden dust that felt like nothing more than a bit of attic silt on the skin. But it was also tenacious, bonding to fabric and skin with an almost magnetic persistence, and it could not be washed away with water or soap. The thief who took the bait was a woman known as Silva, a specialist in extracting documents from heavily guarded private libraries. She slipped into the archives and acquired a scroll detailing the Crown's secret subsidies to certain merchant guilds, a document that would cause an uproar if made public. Her mission was a success, but her triumph was short-lived. Hours later, in her rented room, she noticed a faint, golden sheen on her fingertips and the cuff of her dark cloak. She tried to brush it off, then wash it off, but the shimmer only seemed to brighten with the friction, as if she were polishing the very particles that betrayed her. She was not just carrying a stolen secret, she was wearing it. The duel that followed was a chase painted in light. Lysandra did not take to the streets herself. Instead, she released her trained falcon, a bird she had raised from a hatchling. The falcon's eyes were uniquely sensitive to the specific wavelength of the pollen's glow. From her perch high in the bell tower, Lysandra would watch the bird's flight, a dark speck against the sky that would suddenly bank and circle over a particular street or square, tracing Silver's path through the city as clearly as if she were dragging a ribbon of stars behind her. Silver, for her part, moved with a growing desperation. She could not hide in a crowd, for the pollen made her stand out to the one observer that mattered. She could not take shelter, for she would simply be cornered. She was a walking beacon, and her pursuer was a creature of the air, turning the entire capital into a shrinking cage. This was the ultimate escalation, a defense that used life itself as a snare, proving that the most effective prison for a secret could be the very body of the person who tried to steal it. The silent war in the archives did not remain confined to its subterranean vaults. Its most profound consequence echoes across the centuries, directly shaping the historical record we attempt to study today. Every victory in the shadows, whether by thief or inkmaker, left a permanent scar on the parchment of the past. When a scroll thief succeeded in extracting a document and it was never recovered, that piece of history vanished forever. A treaty clause, a detailed land survey, the personal diary of a key advisor, all could be erased from existence as if they had never been written. In other cases, a thief's victory was more insidious. A perfect forgery, a palimpsest created to replace an original, would be carefully shelved and accepted as genuine. Generations of scholars would later base their research on this fabricated truth, building entire historical narratives upon a foundation laid by a master criminal centuries before. We still debate the authenticity of certain medieval charters and land grants, unaware that the controversy began not in a scholarly dispute, but in a secret duel between a forger's patience and an archivist's oversight. Conversely, every triumph by the Inkmakers Guild ensured the survival of the official state narrative. They preserved the king's version of a rebellion, the crown's accounting of treasury funds, the sanctioned story of a royal succession. But this victory for preservation was also often a victory for suppression. The dissenting voice, the unpopular account, the record of a failure that contradicted the myth of infallible leadership, these were the documents the Inkmaker's alchemy was designed to let fade, to curse, or to guard so fiercely they could never see the light of day. Every successful defense of a scroll case was a decision about which truths were allowed to endure. This forces a difficult question upon us. How can we speak of an objective history when the documents that survived were filtered through such a violent, clandestine selection process? The medieval past we know is not a pure, unaltered stream of information. It is a collection of fragments that were deemed valuable enough to fight for, to steal, or to protect with every ingenious tool available. The legacy of these duels is the very shape of our knowledge, a reminder that what we accept as fact is often simply what was left standing after a silent war had concluded. Theron's defense began not with the scroll, but with the tool used to write it. The document in question was a copy of the secret royal vault locations, and he knew any direct tampering could alert a clever thief. His solution was a masterpiece of acoustic engineering disguised as a simple writing instrument. He crafted a quill from the feather of a specific breed of owl, known for its silent flight, but carved its nib with microscopic, irregular serrations. To the scribe using it, the quill felt and wrote normally, producing a flawless duplicate of the text. Yet, as it moved across the parchment, these tiny imperfections scratched a chaotic, nearly invisible pattern of microgrooves into the vellum's surface. It was a pattern designed not to be seen, but to be heard. In the profound, resonant silence of the stone archives, this parchment became an acoustic trap. When flexed or even held at a certain angle in the still air, those grooves would catch and amplify the faintest vibrations, producing a soft, repeating echo of the original scratch of the quill. It was a sound so quiet it registered not as a noise, but as a persistent, ghostly presence in the air around the document. The thief, a man known for his patience, successfully swapped the copy with a blank sheet and retreated to a secluded reading alcove, believing himself secure. He unrolled his prize in the dead of night, the only light a single shuttered lantern. The moment the parchment straightened, the alcove filled with a faint, whispering echo, the ghost of the quill's labor repeating over and over. He could not hear it himself, his own movements masking the subtle resonance, but the archive guardians patrolling the corridors with their trained ears attuned to the building's unique acoustics heard it clearly. To them, it was as if a lone cricket were chirping from a room that should have been utterly silent. They did not need to see the crime, only to follow the sound. They surrounded the alcove, their silent approach masked by the very echo that betrayed the thief, and found him hunched over the scroll, utterly unaware that the method of its creation had sung his location to the very people he sought to evade. This duel proved that a defense could be woven into the act of writing itself, turning the process of creation into a permanent, invisible sentry for the finished product. The most potent weapons in the archives were not made of iron or ink, but of pure fear. Both sides understood that a mind gripped by paranoia could be more effectively disabled than any lock or guard. The Inkmakers Guild became masters of this spectral warfare, deliberately leaking rumors about their most dreaded creations. Whispers would circulate of a scroll written in a special ink that, if read by unauthorized eyes, would not cause physical harm, but would instead plant a seed of profound, incurable melancholy in the reader's soul. Another tale spoke of a document that carried a phantom plague, not of the body but of bad fortune, ensuring any thief who possessed it would suffer a cascade of personal and professional ruin. These were not necessarily true curses, but the power of belief made them real. A thief who had heard the stories might find himself hesitating before a promising scroll, his hand trembling as he reached for it, his mind already conjuring the misfortunes that might follow. On the other side of the conflict, the Scroll Thieves wielded a more intimate form of psychological terror. Their goal was to prove that no space was truly secure, not even the private quarters of the most vigilant guardian. They would execute minor, unnerving thefts designed to demonstrate their absolute access. A guardian might return to his small chamber to find a single, distinctive button had been cleanly sliced from his spare uniform hanging on a hook. An inkmaker might discover that a single, irreplaceable ingredient jar in his workshop had been moved a mere inch to the left on a crowded shelf. These were not acts of grand larceny, but calculated messages. They were saying, "We were here in your most private space, and we chose to take nothing but your peace of mind." The effect was corrosive. An inkmaker, now doubting the sanctity of his own workshop, might second-guess a complex recipe, adding an extra ingredient out of fear of sabotage and ruining an entire batch of security ink. A guardian, once stoic and confident, might start at every flickering shadow, turning to investigate a sound that was not there, his attention divided and his effectiveness shattered. This environment of manufactured dread became a self-sustaining defense and a relentless offense. The archives transformed into a place where the imagination was the enemy, where the real threat was not always what you could see, but what you had been led to believe was waiting for you in the silence. Cale understood that the ultimate defense was not a stronger lock, but a more alluring key. His opponent was a thief of legendary skill, a man who had never failed to acquire his target. The prize was a fragile peace treaty, a document that could prevent a war or start one, depending on who held it. Cale knew the thief would come for it, and that no single scroll, no matter how well guarded, could survive such dedicated attention. So he did the unthinkable. He created two. In a secluded chamber, he produced a perfect twin to the original treaty. The vellum was aged to match, the seals were flawless, and the script was an exact duplicate penned by his own steady hand. To the eye, to the touch, even to the most careful measurement, they were indistinguishable. Only their ink held the secret. The true treaty was written with a standard, durable guild ink. Its twin, however, was a beautifully laid trap. Kale had mixed its ink with a fine, odorless powder ground from the roots of the white drowsiness flower, a potent sedative that released its vapor only when the parchment was flexed and warmed by human hands. He then placed both scrolls in the same vault, side by side, an irresistible pair. The thief, as predicted, found his way to them. Confronted with two identical prizes, his meticulous planning faltered. He could not carry both, and a lengthy examination here was impossible. Trusting his luck, he made a choice, selecting one scroll at random and vanishing back into the city's veins. His victory felt complete as he unrolled his prize in a dusty attic, eager to verify his haul. The moment the parchment unfurled, a cloud of invisible vapor, warmed by his own grip, wafted into the air. He took a deep breath, expecting the scent of old paper and ink, and found instead a sudden, overwhelming wave of fatigue. His limbs grew heavy, his thoughts blurred, and within minutes he slumped to the floor in a deep, unnatural sleep, the forged treaty still clutched in his hand. The archive guardians, following a tip from Kale, found him there hours later, captured not by a struggle, but by his own success. This was the Duel of the Twin Scrolls, a masterstroke of psychological combat. It proved that the most effective way to defeat a master thief was not to deny him his prize, but to ensure that the very moment of his triumph became the instrument of his defeat. These secret arts were never written down in any official manual. Their survival depended on a chain of trust stretching across generations, a delicate and dangerous process of inheritance. For the Inkmakers Guild, selecting an apprentice was a ritual as complex as any of their formulas. A promising candidate, often a quiet child from a family of scribes or alchemists, would be observed for years. Guild masters did not test for raw intelligence alone. They tested for silence, for a temperament that found satisfaction in the slow, meticulous work of grinding pigments and watching pots simmer for days. They tested loyalty by planting false secrets and watching to see if the young initiate's eyes ever wandered toward a rival court's emissary. Only after this grueling, silent audition would the true teaching begin. An apprentice learned that a single drop of a destabilizing agent could ruin a vat of security ink worth a fortune, a lesson in both chemistry and the gravity of their responsibility. They were taught the ethics of their power, the solemn understanding that the ink they crafted could elevate a just king or cement the reign of a tyrant. Theirs was a burden of creation, and the weight of that duty was passed from one set of hands to the next. On the other side of the conflict, the Scroll Thieves cultivated their own lineage. A master thief nearing the end of a long and precarious career might spot a certain glint in the eye of a clever street urchin or a disaffected junior clerk. The relationship was always one of mentor and student, a personal bond forged in hidden rooms and on midnight rooftops. The master would not begin with the art of picking a lock, but with the art of patience, teaching the novice how to stand motionless in a shadow for hours, breathing so softly they became part of the architecture. They passed down the muscle memory of forging a signature, the precise pressure needed to scrape a palimpsest without tearing it, the way to walk that made no sound on even the creakiest of floorboards. This was not an education in theft, but in becoming a ghost, a person who could move through the world without leaving a trace. Each generation refined these techniques, learning from the failures and successes of the last, ensuring their methods evolved faster than the guild's defenses. This system of succession transformed their conflict from a series of skirmishes into a permanent, shadowy institution. It was no longer just Alaric versus the Magpie or Lysandra versus Silver. It was the guild itself, with its accumulated centuries of alchemical wisdom, pitted against the collective cunning of an unbroken line of shadows. An inkmaker's new formula for attracting ink was a direct response to a forgery technique perfected by a thief student a decade prior. A thief's new method of bypassing a sonic seal was developed to counter a defense invented by an inkmaker's most brilliant apprentice. This was a perpetual arms race, but the weapons were recipes and techniques. The battlefield was the human mind, and the war was fought over the very substance of history. The traditions of this silent war were etched not in stone, but in the unwavering dedication of those who chose to spend their lives in the quiet, desperate struggle to either protect a truth or set one free. The most heartbreaking duel in the archives was fought with salt water and regret. Inkmaker Isolde was tasked with guarding a scroll that held a terrible secret, a signed confession detailing a noble family's long-buried act of betrayal. She knew that physical traps or complex alchemy might not be enough to stop the right person or the wrong one from taking it. Her defense was a work of profound psychological insight. She treated the precious vellum with a delicate solution of purified salts, a mixture that was invisible once it dried. To any routine inspection, the scroll was normal. But when exposed to the moisture in the air, particularly the dampness of a human hand or the humidity of a hidden room at night, the salts would absorb the water and bloom into translucent, pearlescent stains that trailed down the parchment like frozen tears. It was a silent, visual poem of guilt. The thief who took the scroll was no ordinary mercenary. He was a distant cousin of the disgraced family, a man who had grown up with the proud stories of their name and now sought to erase this single, damning piece of evidence. He succeeded in his theft, slipping the scroll from its case and retreating to a secluded garret. There, under the faint light of a single candle, he unrolled his prize, his own hands damp with nervous anticipation. As he read the first lines of the confession, the vellum began to weep. The tear stains spread, clouding the ink, making the words themselves seem to dissolve in sorrow. For the thief, it was not a chemical reaction, it was an accusation. The parchment was crying for the shame his family had caused, and he was the one holding it, causing it more pain. The emotional impact was devastating. He was not caught by a guard or foiled by a clever mechanism. He was defeated by his own conscience, mirrored back at him by the very object he had stolen. Overwhelmed with a grief he had not anticipated, he could not bring himself to destroy the scroll. Instead, under the cover of deepest night, he slipped back into the archives and returned it to its case, leaving the confession and its ghostly tears for history to judge. This duel proved that the most unbreakable lock could be a simple, human feeling, and that the only key that could open it was a genuine change of heart. A duel in the archives could topple a duke. The silent war was never a self-contained drama, but the hidden engine of the kingdom's visible politics. Every stolen scroll or defended document sent ripples through the halls of power, turning the labyrinth of shelves into a scaled-down version of the entire realm. When two great noble houses vied for the king's favor, their most critical battle might not be fought on a tournament field, but over a single piece of parchment deep in the archives. One house would dispatch its agent to steal a land grant that proved their rival's claim was fraudulent. The other would pay the Inkmakers Guild a small fortune to protect that very document with accursed ink, ensuring any thief would suffer such catastrophic bad luck that his own allies would shun him. The outcome of this shadowy engagement would determine which family held influence for a generation, all without a single public duel or declaration of feud. On an even larger scale, the theft of a single scroll detailing military logistics, like grain storage locations or the marching routes of the royal army, could be the quiet first move in a foreign invasion. A rival kingdom seeking to weaken its neighbor would not always mass troops on the border as a first resort. Instead, they would fund a master thief to extract that vital information, crippling the realm's ability to respond effectively long before the first banner was raised. The archives were the kingdom's secret nervous system, and every successful intrusion was a pinprick that could cause the entire body politic to falter. This is why the Guardians and the Inkmakers were not just protecting books, they were defending the operational integrity of the state itself. Their success or failure in a single, silent duel could mean the difference between a stable reign and a devastating war, between a justified inheritance and a stolen title. The struggles for power, for legitimacy, for control, all of the grand themes that defined the medieval world, were being fought and decided in the profound quiet between the towering shelves. The weapons were different, but the stakes were identical. Orrin's greatest insight was that knowledge could be given an expiration date. His opponent was a mercenary named Grimold, a man who valued speed and efficiency above all else. The scroll in question contained the crown's official prediction for the next season's harvest yields. In the right hands, this information was a license to print money, allowing a merchant to buy up futures and manipulate the grain market with absolute certainty. Grimold was hired to acquire it. Orrin knew he could not stop the theft, so he decided to poison the prize itself. He formulated an ink that was a masterpiece of slow-motion sabotage. When first applied, it was a perfect, rich black, but the moment the scroll was unsealed and exposed to air, an imperceptible chemical reaction began. The ink remained perfectly legible for exactly 1 week, a generous window that would lure the thief into a false sense of security. Then, day by day, the letters would begin to soften at the edges, like a coastline being eroded by a gentle tide. By the end of the second week, the entire text would be an indistinct gray smudge, a ghost of its former self. The duel was not one of pursuit, but of patience. Orrin made no attempt to catch Grimold in the act. He simply let him take the scroll, knowing the real trap had already been sprung. Grimold, believing he held a fortune, now found himself in a frantic race against an invisible clock. His every move was governed by decay. He had to locate his buyer, arrange the meeting, and negotiate the sale, all while the proof of his product was literally fading in his possession. He could not afford to be cautious. He had to be loud, and haste makes mistakes. Orrin, from the quiet of his workshop, simply tracked the mercenaries' increasingly desperate movements through the city. He listened for rumors of a man offering harvest predictions, watched for the telltale signs of a rushed and risky negotiation. Grimold was not hunted by men, but by the relentless turning of an hourglass only he could see. This was the duel of the shifting sands, a conflict where time itself was the ultimate arbiter. It forced a fundamental question: what is information truly worth when you can watch its value evaporate with every passing day? The quiet war beneath the capital began to tick. The soft slosh of alchemical potions was now accompanied by the faint click of a spring and the delicate rasp of a finely filed tumbler. Inkmakers, once pure chemists, started to think like engineers. A simple scroll case was no longer just a container, it was a mechanism. A master inkmaker might design a case that, if opened without first depressing a hidden latch on its underside, would release a slender needle coated not with poison, but with a powerful skin irritant derived from nettles. The thief would not be caught, but he would be marked, his itching, red-stained hand a walking confession for the next several days. Another design incorporated a tiny, self-contained smoke bomb, a mix of saltpeter and charcoal dust that would erupt in a harmless but disorienting cloud the moment the case was breached, alerting every guardian in the vicinity and ruining the thief's precious invisibility. On the other side of this technological divide, the thieves answered with steel and ingenuity. Their lock-picking tools evolved from carved bone to finely tempered metal, shaped into complex torsion wrenches and hooks that could feel their way through the most intricate lock with an artist's touch. Reaching a scroll placed high on a shelf, once a perilous exercise in stacking unstable furniture, was solved with the invention of a compact, early grappling hook. This device, with its collapsible tines and a silken cord, could be silently tossed to catch on a high ledge or a carved gargoyle, allowing a thief to ascend into the shadows above the guardian's usual sightline. This was no longer a contest of pure wits, but a duel of fabrication. This escalating arms race was a perfect, small-scale reflection of the world above. Society was slowly turning from the mysteries of alchemy toward the predictable laws of physics and mechanics, and the archives became a secret laboratory for this transition. Every failed theft forced the Inkmakers to devise a more reliable mechanical trap. Every new sealed case pushed the thieves to refine their understanding of leverage and pressure. Their conflict became an engine for innovation, driving progress in fields that had nothing to do with parchment or secrets. A thief's need to see in near-total darkness spurred experiments with ground lenses and reflective surfaces, leading to crude but effective periscopes. An Inkmaker's quest for a stronger, more durable vellum prompted new methods of treating and stretching animal skin. The endless shadow war was not just protecting knowledge, it was actively creating it, forging the early tools of empirical science in the fires of a silent, desperate conflict over truth. Sometimes the most profound victory in a silent war is a shared surrender. The ninth and final duel was not a clash of ink and stealth, but a quiet conversation in a forgotten sub-basement, a room so deep in the archives that the air felt ancient and still. The scroll in question was a private journal, a nobleman's candid account that contained a devastating truth about a long-past scandal, one that would ruin the reputation of a family that had, over generations, rebuilt itself with honor. The thief, a woman named Anya, was the last living descendant of that family. Her mission was not to steal for profit or power, but to erase this single, painful blemish from existence. The Inkmaker, a man named Rowan, had been tasked with preserving the journal as part of a new collection of historical documents. He saw it not as a weapon, but as an unvarnished piece of the past, a truth that deserved to be kept, if not celebrated. They found each other in the dim light of a single lantern, both with a hand outstretched toward the same wooden case. For a long moment they were frozen, two opposing forces defined by their roles. Anya saw a guardian of a lie that would destroy her present. Rowan saw a vandal intent on destroying an irreplaceable piece of the past. The standoff was absolute, a silent battle of wills where the only sound was their breathing. Then one of them spoke. We do not know who broke the silence, only that a dialogue began, hesitant and charged with suspicion. Anya explained the human cost, the lives that would be shattered by this old man's pen. Rowan argued for the integrity of the record, the danger of allowing any truth to be deleted simply because it was inconvenient. They talked for what felt like hours in that dusty room, and as they spoke, they each began to see the ghost of the other's conviction. A direct conflict served neither of their goals. If Anya destroyed the journal, Rowan would report the act and her family name would be scandalized anyway. If Rowan preserved it openly, he would achieve his goal but destroy a line of innocent people in the process. So they brokered a secret pact, a compromise born of mutual necessity. Anya agreed not to destroy the scroll. In return, Rowan swore a solemn oath to ensure it was filed in the most classified section of the archives, a vault designated for documents of historical significance that were too sensitive for public or even scholarly access. It would be preserved for some future, more understanding era, but it would be hidden from the world of their own time. This duel ended not with a winner or a loser, but with a fragile peace. The scroll was shelved in its new, secret home, and both Anya and Rowan returned to their lives, bound by a secret within a secret. It was a rare moment of détente in a world of endless conflict, proving that even amidst the most entrenched opposition, a shared interest in a better outcome could sometimes forge a bridge across the deepest divide. The slow death of the silent war began not with a bang, but with the steady, mechanical rhythm of a new machine. The printing press did not simply create more books, it shattered the very concept of a singular, priceless document. When a single scroll could be reproduced 100 times, 1,000 times, its power was diluted. A master thief could no longer hold a kingdom hostage by stealing one original, because a dozen perfect copies already existed in other libraries. The value of information shifted from its scarcity to its availability, and the intricate, alchemical defenses of the Inkmakers felt suddenly archaic, like building a fortress to protect a single grain of sand on a vast beach. At the same time, the state was changing. Kings and chancellors began to consolidate their power into formal, uniformed institutions. The role of the lone archive guardian, a silent monk with a sword, was absorbed into a broader police force that patrolled the streets in the open light of day. Espionage became a matter of bureaucracy and coded letters, not a high-stakes treasure hunt through a labyrinth of parchment. The romantic, shadowy figure of the scroll thief, a specialist in the art of the palimpsest and the hollowed-out book, was replaced by the common spy, an agent who dealt in gossip and infiltration rather than the physical theft of objects. A cultural wind was also shifting. After centuries of clandestine control, a new preference for transparency, however fragile, began to take root in the halls of power. The idea that knowledge should be guarded so fiercely, that truth required such elaborate and secretive defenses, started to feel like the method of a bygone, less enlightened age. The Inkmakers Guild, with its secret recipes and sacred oaths, found its specialized knowledge becoming obsolete. Their workshops, once the heartbeat of the kingdom's secret defense, fell silent, their complex potions gathering dust. The archives themselves were modernized, their dark corners illuminated by better lanterns, their secret passages mapped and sealed. The profound, weaponized silence that had defined the duels was broken by the hum of a new era. The silent war did not end with a treaty or a final, dramatic confrontation. It simply faded, its practitioners retiring or adapting, their legendary duels slowly melting into the stuff of fireside tales and scholarly footnotes. This quiet passing marked one of history's great transitions, a fundamental shift from hoarding knowledge to distributing it, a move that would ultimately redefine the relationship between power and the people it served.